Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Indie 500 Project Vodcast. Today we have some very special guests. We have the Keenans. Please introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Tim Keenan,
And I'm Holly Keenan.
and we're married.
Ah, that is so beautiful. And we noticed your little dog in the background there before. What's his name?
Tux.
Or her?
Hey, Tux.
We have Tux, who's head of security here at Misfits Attic, and we also have a daughter, Haley, who's in charge of screaming.
Is she old enough to play any of the games you do?
We did a video, fake video, when I first launched a virus named Tom of her playing, and it was basically her on the keyboard, and I had like a gamepad behind, and I was playing, and it was really funny because she was hitting the buttons, and it made it look like she was really actually playing, but she wasn't.
No, she's only 2.5, so
Yeah.
she's a little young. She tries.
Oh, future game tester, though.
Yeah. She's a good game breaker.
Right.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit what you're doing? What is Misfits Attic, and what are you guys doing?
Well, right now, I guess we're trying to stay afloat. So we're pushing a virus named Tom, which is our first title, as much as we can. So we ported that to Mac and Linux. We were recently in Humble Indie Bundle 9, and we're also going out on Vita, possibly PS4 ending, and stuff like that. So we're always trying to keep that alive because that's the only way we can make income at the moment, because it's our only title. And in the meantime, we're also working on 3 different prototypes, which will hopefully be our next title. And in theory, and every time I say anything that predicts more than a month ahead, I'm wrong. But in theory, in a few months, we're going to try to kickstart whichever of our prototypes we decide we're going to make for our second title. We're going to try and put one at the forefront and try and kickstart it so we can fund it.
If you're launching a Kickstarter, people are going to want to know your background. So could you tell us something about it?
Yeah, sure. You want to go first?
Sure. My background is actually in design, graphic design. My parents were illustrators, so I grew up kind of playing under their drafting tables and drawing. So when I got all grown up, I knew I wanted to do something with art and design. So I pursued a career in graphic design, and my focus has really been on interactive design. So I've spent the past 10 plus years working in different interactive media. And when I got together with Tim, that expanded out into creating video games. So I actually have a full-time job where I work on software for different devices. And in my spare time, I help Tim with his video games.
Forced labor, slave labor. And then I went into making video games at Rainbow Studios back in like 2001. Worked on some console titles like ATV Off-Road Fury and Splashdown. And then I jumped ship over into CG animation. I went to DreamWorks Animation. I worked on Shrek 2 all the way through How to Train Your Dragon and Megamind. Madagascar, Over the Hedge, all the DreamWorks films. Working as an effects artist, so doing like simulating natural phenomena like fire and water and stuff like that, and then working on systems in the background like foliage and stuff. And then at a certain point, I wanted to go back to video games, but I didn't want to. If I was going to work those hours, I kind of wanted to do it for myself, and I always wanted more creative input on the films we were making and stuff like that. And it's just really hard to do when you've got 400 people making a film. So I jumped ship, started my own little indie studio. We put out our first game, and now we're trying to keep the lights on, just so that the goal is to try to maintain a living doing what I love, which is making games.
And I got to commend you on what you actually have produced, because that is a fun game. Can you tell us about A Virus Named Tom?
Yeah, it's an action puzzle game that started out basically because I was frustrated that I started working on all these games with all these different people, and the projects always just collapsed in on themselves for various reasons. So I decided I was just going to make basically a pipe game, like Pipe Mania or something like that, and just put it out and get it out on XBLA, and that way it would have a game out, and then I could make more. And then as I was making it, the designer in me couldn't just let it go. I couldn't just be like, oh, I'm just making a game like that. So I started thinking, oh, well, what if in between levels you like it was a circuit, and what if in between levels you had to get to the next circuit and there were enemies, and so you had to dodge. And then that was making kind of two games. And even though I loved ActRaiser and games that like took two distinct elements and separated them like that, I kind of wanted to integrate them. So we were talking on a walk one time, I thought, and like it was like, what if they were all the same thing? What if when you were trying to reconfigure the circuitry, you were on lines in between them and there were enemies on those, and so there was like a dexterity element and a puzzle element. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And then I needed some, and then I got frustrated with my team, so then I was like, I have a wife that's incredibly talented, and I could just exploit her to no end. So I did that. And then eventually, as time went on, I roped in some of my DreamWorks friends to do some of the artwork for the kind of world art and the animations. And yeah, and then it just kind of all fell together just like, 4 years later.
So how has the title been received? How is the gaming community represent? I'm trying to find the word here.
The response has been pretty awesome. I mean, like, I was actually kind of blown away when we were launching it. I was really worried. I always worried that everyone would, because we're making two types of games, right? We're making like a puzzle game, and we're making a dexterity game. And some people that love Twitch games might love that and hate the puzzles, and some people that love puzzle games might hate the Twitch mechanics. And so, like, I was really nervous about that when we launched. And it was our first game, so nobody knew anything about us. So basically, when it went out there, like, there was just so much love. Like, I was so expecting to get slammed. And don't get me wrong, there was some slamming that went on. Like, basically, most of our reviews were always like 8s or 9s, and things were going really well. And then some of the larger sites, basically, I think, started giving us, just like 7s or something like that. And it was kind of a bummer because some of the reviews were like, it was clear they hadn't played the game as much as some of the other reviews. But, that's probably biased. That's probably me just whining about it. And then there were a couple that came in that just didn't get the game. And that's fine. That's what you expect. But I think for the most part, I've been kind of blown away with how much I always kind of expect, especially with our first title and with all those brilliant indie games out there, for people to just kind of be like, oh, it's a good game. But like most of the people, and now granted, if they meet me, they're probably going to say my game is really good. But most of the response has blown me away. I started like saving all the fan mail that we would get. And like if I was ever on that roller coaster where I was just like, oh, we're never going to make any money, like we're going to fail, I just like read a couple of those things. Some people would send me emails in character from Dr. X or Tom or something like that. And to get stuff like that, just like, it's just incredible. And that just is kind of why we do this stuff, right? It's just so that you can kind of touch some people and, kind of make their day. That really feels cool.
How did you come up with the story on top of the game?
It took a while.
Yeah, the story probably took about a year to develop the story.
Yeah, because, it started off as this simple, like, you were just this program that was named 10EX, and he was kind of had this Pinocchio complex where he wanted to be, a real thing. He was going to call himself Tom, and there was an MCP, and it was very kind of Tron-like. And then over time, we started, like, reevaluating everything in the game, and we were like, well, you're spreading something. But what if instead of electricity, it was a virus? Because I always loved the idea of an anti-hero, like kind of like some darkness to everything that I do. So we were like, if you were spreading a virus, what would be fun? And we started like, oh, what if your iPhone blew up and like Facebook, you post random statuses, and it was kind of funny, but it just wasn't visceral funny, because it was like, I guess I wanted more destruction. And then I was like, oh my God, what would be funny technology if a virus took over in it? And I was like, in the 60s, the future was all these robots and real things that could cause a lot of physical harm, and teleporters and stuff like that. And I was like, and that's when it was kind of born. It was like this perfect mixture of like technology gone haywire, but in a thing that we could do an animatic of, an interstitial. You could see things kind of going horribly wrong in a much funnier way than not being able to post your breakfast status choice to your status on Facebook, and a much more like my dog's head falls off and my heart teleports to a different place than my body.
I think some of the original story ideas we had were also much larger in scale. Like we kind of envisioned whole sections of the city, like falling apart, and then expanding to parts of the country or the world. And then we quickly realized that we weren't going to be able to create artwork to support that kind of story.
Right.
So we had to really take into consideration like what we were going to be able to actually produce.
Right.
Versus just our wild imagination.
Yeah, we were going to do a War Games kind of thing where, like, you were shutting down different sections of the world. It was, like, a more realistic kind of thing. And, like, armies and stuff were going to grind to a halt. And it was just, it was much more real, and it was pretty dark.
Yeah.
But then the thing is that when you were so far away in the satellite view of the world, it wasn't close enough. Like, and I wanted some humor in there as well. And so when we decided to do these physical things, we could bring the camera right down into it, and instead of being like a city, it was just like a little girl and her dog, right? Or it was a guy going to work, and like that felt like we could make these little snippets that were like 10 minutes long so we could afford the animation.
And it gives you something to emote with if you're actually looking at a person or a dog or whatever it is, rather than a satellite view of a city, which ends up looking just kind of like a pattern.
Yeah.
Who is responsible for the very cute and very malevolent design of Tom?
That's Holly and my friend Travis.
Yeah.
That both kind of combined. He was working on all the City of Tomorrow kind of stuff, and she was working on all the in-game stuff because he's like an illustrator, and she's like a graphic designer. So it's kind of like form and function kind of meeting. And Tom was super important because he was the main character. And so I knew that I was going to art direct that a lot, and I was going to noodle that. And so I kind of had them both so that I wouldn't annoy either one too much when I was going around with it. And she had to take Travis's designs and make them work so that they would work in game and make them clean, and also so they'd work on a t-shirt and stuff like that. And then Trav had the look of all the other stuff because he was designing that kind of world, so we wanted him in on it. And so they kind of approached it from those two different directions.
We actually had a lot of people work on Tom. We iterated on Tom for probably, in the back burner, maybe 6 months.
Right.
We had a lot of different sketches for that character.
Yeah. And Brian worked on the emotions a lot.
Yeah.
When he does different things, like when he's pissed or he's happy or whatever, or he's freaked out because a drone is coming toward him. Another artist that we had, Brian, worked on all those emotions to bring him kind of to life. And of course the programmers, with making his eyes move and, the animations and stuff like that. When we talk about things like 6 months, we're talking about the back burner, and we're also talking, when I say 4 years, I was working full time at DreamWorks for a chunk of that. So it was kind of like 10 hours a week or something like that. So some of these, it took us a very long time, but some of these numbers are a little bit skewed by the fact that we're working on it part time.
Many people work on indie games in their spare time, but since A Virus Named Tom, you've gone full time with it.
Yeah.
Haven't you?
Yep. Yeah, I'm actually kind of living the dream, the very impoverished dream of the indie, where luckily Holly has a full-time job and I'm able to pull in enough money off of what we've made to pull my half of things. Without any extra, so no savings or anything like that. So the goal would be to make us sustainable such that I'm making not a great salary, but at least a livable salary without putting so much pressure on Holly to never have to go between jobs for too long or anything like that. But considering we've put out one title and the fact that I'm still able to work on it full time, that's, I feel pretty blessed to be able to do that because a lot of people aren't able to do that.
Are we going to see more from Tom?
So the things we want to do with Tom is the things we never finished with Tom. We wanted to be able to do online because there's this co-op mode that a lot of people aren't able to play because they don't sit in front of their computer with their friends. And hopefully, that's why, it fits so well with a console. So that's why we'd like to get it out on consoles. It's just a matter of, with QA and all of the headaches that go along with consoles, it's just at points been cost prohibitive for us to do. We want to make it so that you can share levels with your friends. And I actually have a level editor that we never polished up and put in because we're making enough money off the game to keep the lights on, but not enough to continue development. So we're still going to push it out to new platforms. And I'd love to make a second iteration of it at some point. But for now, we're looking with our second title to do something different. And then maybe we can go back to Tom at some point later. I think I've got a lot of cool ideas that I think would be fun, and we kind of left the story open. Um, but we're looking to throw another dart at the dartboard right now. Um,
Could you talk a little more about your Kickstarter that you're planning?
Yeah, so the big problem that we stress over right now is which game, because we have three prototypes that are all very different. And of course, because I made them, I'm in love with them all. And I was kind of hoping that I would make three prototypes real quick, and just as happens in game design, like two of them just kind of wouldn't work or wouldn't be fun, and one of them would just be awesome. And as it turns out, I feel, and the people that I've shown them to, they feel they're all fun and they all scare me in like completely different ways. So what I think we're going to do in the next week or two, which will probably net us no information whatsoever, is put out a video showing all three and asking our community, which has been growing quite a bit in the last year, which I'm kind of just amazed by the amount of growth on all of our various channels. Is basically show them all of them and say, hey, which one would you guys be willing to kickstart? Like, if you're willing to kickstart all of them, vote for all three. And that'll probably give us some gobbledygook of numbers that won't make sense anyway, and eventually I'll have to man up and make a decision. But right now I think the front runner is Duskers. So Duskers is basically a game where you remotely pilot drones into derelict space to kind of scavenge. And the story, we've got a couple different ideas. Our favorite one at the moment is that just kind of something's gone completely wrong, and basically the universe is a giant graveyard, and you're a survivor, and you don't really know what's happened because you were out salvaging things. And so basically you're trying to survive. And so you send these drones in because it might have been a calamity. There might be a disease that happened or something like that. And inevitably in these derelict ships, there's bad things that you run into. But unlike a dungeon crawler or a space marine kind of game where you go in guns blazing, the idea is that you're trying to survive. So avoiding conflict is a completely acceptable and like less risky way to go, probably. So it's kind of one of those things like Alien, where you drop some sensors and you're going through and the sensors go off and you know that there's an alien in there. So you, by powering the areas of the ship, you can open and close doors, and you can kind of reroute the alien and maybe lead them into traps. So it's kind of a little bit more of a tactical game, if you will, and more of a, I feel weird calling it survival horror, but it kind of has that vibe where there's a tension because it's a real-time game. But it also has a lot of weird things about it that I don't know how people will respond to. I put a command line interface into it so that you're controlling the drones via like command line, and you have to manually switch your camera between the drones and individually control them instead of like a real-time strategy game where you like issue commands and stuff like that. And I feel that gives you a real visceral feel that you're in this and that you're dealing with old tech, and stuff like that. Even though it's a sexy future, like your stuff is breaking down all the time. That's another element to it that I think is really important for strategy. And I'm going to get all geeky and designy right now. But I love it's got a roguelike quality to it because every ship that you go to is going to be procedurally generated. And what I love the idea of is adaptability. Like when you're a scavenger, you just got to use what you got. And what's going to happen is you're going to find drone upgrades that will allow you to do different things, like scan for aliens or mines that you could maybe drop. Or even we have a cloaking one that you could maybe scooch through some rooms that might have aliens in them. But eventually they atrophy and they break. And you're going to find new ones. And that's basically what that's going to do, is force you to have this adaptive strategy where you will shuffle your hand constantly. And so you won't be able to say, oh, my favorite strategy is to have this and that and the other thing. You're just going to have to deal with what you get. And I think that'll make roguelike sometimes the idea is that you're going to replay and replay and replay, and you want that to feel fresh, hence procedural generation. And I think that when you have all these different upgrades that are constantly switching out, and you've got to come up with new solutions because you don't have your cloak this time, but you do have a Gatling gun, so you could just be Rambo for a little bit. You know what I mean? I think that's my hope in what the game will be like.
Permadeath?
Permadeath, yeah. Yeah, and probably a harsh version of it. I mean, there might be some persistence. We might do persistence with the story. Like when you find a ship, there might be a log from a captain that gives you a little bit more information on what happened. And maybe those will stay along so that like you'll learn more of the story and not even in a linear way, but just in a way kind of like Gone Home or something like that, where you're just kind of piecing it together from various things left behind. But yeah, no, when you die, you're dead. You got to start over.
Is that your favorite as well, Holly?
Roguelikes?
Oh, no, between the prototypes, I think.
Oh God, between the prototypes. It is. It's I think it's the most unique game concept. There's a lot of potential in it. I think we could have a lot of fun with it. It's also one of the scarier ones for me too because the scale of it could be kind of large.
Right.
It's definitely the one I think I feel the most passionate about.
Right. Yeah, I'm kind of in love with them all because they're all like my babies. Like we have one that's a mashup of chess and magic, and I love chess and I love magic, and I've been working on it for a while. And then we have one that's just a simple stealth action game that it's so clean and based around a simple mechanic, and it's so easy for people to pick up and play. Whereas Duskers, it's like I cringe when I sit behind people because I have to like explain so much, and I know there'll have to be a tutorial and stuff like that. So I'm kind of in love with them all, and I think that's a problem. And I think that Holly's definitely had a slant toward
there's definitely one that I think is probably the most challenging for us to pursue, and it's not Duskers. And that one I've always been kind of like, I don't think we should do that one.
Right.
But I won't say which one of the three that is.
Yeah, there's a practicality that comes into it, and like the problem is any game you make is going to take a long time and have its own set of challenges. But we're just trying to, based on our limited experience, trying to guide ourselves and be like, we have to make money off of this thing, and we have to make it in a certain amount of time, and which one could we kickstart, and that's kind of where the stress comes.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. It's like, which game do we think would be the most fun? Which game do we think is kind of the most interesting for people? And which game can we actually pull off and have a business model that will work?
Right.
And they're not always one and the same. So it's been kind of trying to drive those different legs to meet in some sort of common area where we get a happy sort of mix of all of those elements. That's what we've been working on over the past year. And I think we are now at a point where all three of them are are firing on all cylinders relatively equally. So it's just sort of a matter of picking one. And I think that's the difficulty. We've gotten them all to a point where they can work, where they're great games to play, where they're business models that we can actually make a living off of, and that they're games that we can actually make.
Right.
Do you worry anything about timing? Which of the games might actually be the best received on the scene?
Yeah, so that's a big factor, right? Because as an indie, there's just a deluge of games and great games, so you want to be able to be seen. But I find that line of thinking can also make you spin your wheels, because the thing is that I might say, I honestly, even though like roguelikes are starting to become very in vogue right now, that would almost be a reason that I would be like, oh, I don't know if I want to be coming out with a deluge of those. But then it's going to take us so long to make a game that what people are going to be into in like probably 2 years when we're done with whatever game.
Something else is going to be popular.
Something else will be popular. And not only that, but then maybe like there'll be room. Like, first person shooters became popular and they're still popular. So it's like, I think at the end of the day, you do want to do something that you think you can pitch, especially if you're trying to kickstart, that like people will see the potential in and see the love in. But there's only so far you can kind of go with that, because trying to figure out what people might like, I think it's that classic thing of if you're trying to figure out what people like right now, then you're kind of behind in a way,
And also, do you feel that indie games have a different window compared to like AAAs? Because right now we have Battlefield and Call of Duty competing for the FPS scene, but those games only have a window of about 3 to 6 months, and then they're kind of like forgotten. Do indie games have a larger window that they can work in?
I think so. I definitely think so. I think the reason for that might not be anything other than the fact that people just don't know about them. So when you launch as an indie, like when you launch as Call of Duty, like you got commercials going, people know, right? When you launch as a virus named Tom, like a lot of people don't know. So you're going to get a lot of sales later on because it'll either be on sale and people take a chance, or word of mouth starts to spread, or you get into a bundle and then a lot of people know about it. So that kind of there seems like there's just a huge audience out there, and it's just about getting the word to them. So I think that's why indie games tend to have like kind of longer shelf life in a way, is because
it's a slower grind.
It's a slower grind.
Like, I mean, for us, like we do interviews like this. That means a few more people have heard about the game. When you talk about a AAA title, you're spending millions and millions of dollars on a giant marketing push that sort of burns real hot and flames out real quickly because they can't sustain that amount of marketing dollars. Whereas we never have those marketing dollars. So we have to constantly be talking about our game and trying to reach new people just with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think there's also, like, with indie games, a lot of times, like, and this isn't true for all indie games, but I think things like, having the latest, and greatest shaders and graphics and physics and all this stuff. Certainly indie games can target certain areas of those, but not all of them in one swath. So I think, like with AAA games, I think what happens sometimes is people will be like, this looks old, like this looks a year ago, whereas this looks bright and shiny and new. And a virus named Tom, since we couldn't compete on that front, it looks the way it should look, and in like 3 years from now, it won't look any worse. I mean, maybe the fact that it was 720 will start to come into play, but like for the most part, like that I think that also helps a little bit.
Do you think the limitation actually helped form the game? I mean, would the game have still its core if the budget would have been different?
That is a really good question. I mean, I have lots of games in my head that I've eliminated because I'm like, no way could we make that. I think that's an awesome game. But then at the same point in time, I say, if I had invested all that time and effort into it, it might not have been a good game. So I've always believed that if you put yourself in a box creatively, you can be more creative if you limit things, because you start to think of different solutions to the same problem. Right? And those solutions, because you were forced to make them, have to be solutions that are usually outside the box. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of what a good example is. Like, because there were some slightly non-traditional ways we might have handled things being an indie game that I would have probably gone in the front door. I call it going in the front door. It's kind of like when you're writing. The front door would be like, okay, like this guy's a cop and, his family's been kidnapped and he's got to go fight the, it's like that's kind of like the front door. And like the side door would be like, this guy is a cop and he's battling with the fact that he's colorblind or something like that, right? And I think as an indie, because you can't go in the front door sometimes because there's just constraints on you, it forces you to find creative solutions to that problem, and then later on you're like, wow, that's a better solution.
I think the character of the game would have changed a little bit, I think, because we, just if you look at the animated cutscenes, for example, we were limited with budget there. We could only do really, really simple 2D animations, and I think the quality of those animations has a particular style. They tell a story in a kind of way that would have been very different if we'd had a bigger budget and we would have maybe done a longer animated scene or maybe a 3D animated scene. The other thing about having a larger budget would have meant that we probably would have been even less disciplined about our time, and it would have taken maybe another couple of years to put out the game. And I do think once you worked on a project for an extended amount of time, your brain starts to just kind of crave something else. So a bigger budget would have definitely, it would have been a luxury on one hand, but I think we would have suffered from some things just by having more money to extend our time.
One thing that would have been great is that with a lot of our contractors and stuff, we had to pay them very sparingly.
Yeah.
And also I had to start doing things that added a lot of stress to my life. Like, a lot of guys that were working on the project, I couldn't pay them full time and I couldn't pay them well. So they were basically working out of passion. And so that would be after they were done with their regular job, right? So I'm sitting here working all day, and then my audio guy I have to give him feedback at night. And then my animator, he has to work on it this weekend. So all of a sudden I'm sitting here trying to have some kind of work-life balance. And it's not just me obsessing and trying to get the game out because we need money, but it's also like me having to be there to support all of my contractors that I can't afford to be like, hey, work during core business hours, you know?
I think it's really interesting, actually, the way that we just answered that question. When you asked us if we'd had a bigger budget, we immediately started talking about how, how we would have changed the features and how the timeline would have been different. Like our first instinct wasn't, oh, we would have made it more comfortable for ourselves and the people that worked for us, to make this game. So it kind of like pretends for the future, right? It's like, oh, we're going to make this mistake again. We have more money.
At the end, I
we're
said
going to throw more stuff in it.
Right, but at the end, I said it. At the end, I was just like, oh, then I could.
But it's interesting that our gut reaction is not to, oh, how could we have made that process better?
Yeah, how could we have made our lives?
How could we have
better?
added more stuff to it?
Yeah.
That's where our head kind of went to begin with.
Yeah, well, Indies fund passion, EA funds flyovers.
Yeah.
What do you feel is an indie game? What qualifies an indie game?
That's such a tough question, because every time you think you can define it, someone finds a nice little loophole that you've excluded somebody. Usually the way I like to think of it myself is that if it's a smaller, passionate team that is usually self-funding, I mean, if they've gone out and found funding, that's fine. But I think usually the key factor is that they want to make something that they love, and they don't necessarily have there's risk. I feel there's a whole lot of risk involved, because like what we did was I quit my full-time job. We used our savings. We got together as anyone that we couldn't do everything that we could do it, and we made a game that we loved. And that's why I feel, in the indie spirit. So if all of a sudden there's a small team, but they're being backed by some VC money, and they're just trying to make a lot of money because this is like their business model, and they don't care what the game is, that's where all of a sudden it's like the size of the team doesn't matter. But then you have some AAA guys that there's a small team that works on something, and they're very passionate. Like, would you call Portal or Portal 2, or especially Portal, the first Portal, would you call that an indie game, even though, like, Valve took over and stuff? It started with a small, passionate team, so it gets really blurry. So, I mean, yeah, that's just a tough one.
Yeah, I don't, maybe in the amount of marketing dollars behind it, like whether or not it's sort of out there in the sort of public consciousness, if it's a game that a lot of people have heard of,
right?
I don't know, but then I mean, you look at like Super Meat Boy, that was certainly indie, and like tons of people know about that game,
right? Yeah, so I think it spawns from just this kind of mom and pop feeling that you want to make a game. You certainly might want to make money off of it, but the main inspiration is your passion is driving you, and you're definitely taking financial risks to put out something that you're incredibly proud of. I don't know.
If I'm looking at the Wikipedia definition, it basically says that it has to be a small team that's working without financial support from a publisher.
Right.
But if we wanna redefine that would mean, for instance, that Valve is an indie developer or Blizzard is an indie developer, because they're developing everything in-house. Mm-hmm. And for instance, hard.
That's a debate too. Like, some people say, like, I remember there was some contest that I think that was won by a house that was like a large house, but they didn't accept money from everybody. And then it's like, are we being punished because we were successful? And then are you calling Double Fine not indie because they've accepted publisher money?
And funding is an interesting question too, right? You can get funding from a publisher to do some portion of your game.
Like, yeah. We could get funding from a publisher to port A Virus Named Tom to another platform, and make the game, but we made the game with our own money. Or let's say Duskers, right? Like, I mean, or our next title, Chess the Gathering, whatever it might be. If we get money from, if all of a sudden a publisher believed in that and they were willing to give us money, but we maintained creative control, would we still be indie? Like, yeah, I mean, it's tough, and I understand that definition too, because it's like, when you're putting your own money on it, that means by definition you're making the decisions and you're not beholden to anybody, and you're kind of mom and pop in it. So Yeah.
That's a really difficult model, though. Like, if that's the definition, like that's a very unsustainable model. I mean,
some have sustained it. It's just it's very difficult.
It's a very difficult way to make a living, though, because you're
Right.
talking about basically you'd have to make, because games are so expensive to make, you'd have to make, every game that you put out there has to be like $1 million game that you're making money off of. I mean, like, say a game costs you 100,000, couple $100,000 to make, then you've got to make that much more from that initial game so that you can save up to make the next
fund
game.
the next game. But then as soon as you funded that game, in theory, all the proceeds could then go toward the next game. Like once you're in that thing.
But it's a really brittle model that is hard.
It is.
It's hard for almost anybody to achieve. So if that's the definition, like, that's pretty brutal.
There are other people that do indie games that aren't necessarily interested in the financial rewards. Like they're like making games because they're passionate about them and they do it in their spare time and they don't really.
But if you're trying to make it, like if you're trying to do it for a living, right?
Yeah.
Like if this is, instead of it just being something you do as a hobby, that's a hard rule to follow.
Yeah, there's a reason it's very difficult for people to define it. That's why when you look at like the IGF submission forum, they talk about like the indie spirit, and they don't try to qualify it too much. They just kind of do that thing where they're like, if you're an indie.
Yeah, I know an indie game when I see it.
Right. Yeah.
Are you looking into the current indie consoles that are coming out? GameStick, Ouya?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The thing that's exciting right now is that there's so much happening that, and this is the thing. Like Holly and I, like when we finished A Virus Named Tom, I think what happened is that like it's very difficult to make projections on the future because you have so little money coming in, and you're like you've got to worry about that, right? You got to worry about the next few months keeping the lights on, right? But what's interesting is that things are moving so fast. Is that as an indie developer, you almost have to assume that a year from now, the landscape will be different, right? So the fact that Ouya comes on, or the fact that any new console or marketplace comes on is exciting because that's like another opportunity, right? Not to say that we don't love, like we're working with Sony, we're working with Valve, and we love them to death, but it's not to say that more opportunity isn't better. Like, for example, Ouya is doing the Free the Game Fund, which is huge. Like if we were able to kickstart and then we were able to kind of double up on that Kickstarter money, which would be huge for us as indies, and then and we have to be exclusive as a release for them, then that's definitely something we would consider because, we'll worry about like, when the game comes out, right now we're trying to fund it. We're trying to make it so that we can keep making games. So, the fact that these things come around and that they're thinking about things in a different way, I honestly think if Steam didn't get as popular as it did, it wouldn't have forced the console manufacturers to open up things the way they are right now. And these, even tablets, everything, if these things weren't changing, then it wouldn't force some of the mired politics that I think was around before. Like I think before as an indie developer, you were really pushed in a corner at gunpoint. And I feel like right now you can kind of say, hey, I could go do this instead. Like I could go launch on this platform and I'm getting X%, so why should I launch on yours for less? And that's really exciting. It's kind of, the death of starting to kill, almost like killing monopolies in a way.
When you're not working on your own games, do you have any time to play any other games?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
It's like a seasonal thing. It seems like we're getting into our game playing season. Winter's like when we seem to kind of stay in more and play.
Yeah. It turns out that like what we do a lot is that like games that we'll play together end up being usually console games.
Yeah.
Though lately.
Oh no! Now that you figured out how to like.
Now that I've figured out
indie console thing where it plugs into your TV.
Yeah, like we were doing we were trying Big Picture before, and now I've got like a wireless keyboard and mouse setup, and it's much easier for me to connect through the HDMI and stuff like that with my laptop. So now, like for example, like the other night we played Gone Home together. And so we've been able to play more PC games together because normally it's like the day is done, we put Haley down, we've got like an hour or two before we've got to like go to bed, and so it's like sit down on the couch and like hit go on the console and play. Like we just played Beyond Two Souls or something like that. But then because now it's easier for me to hook up my laptop, we'll play PC games, and then usually if she goes to bed, like last night, like I'll stay up and play a less fun for her to watch kind of game like FTL or something like that. So yeah, so we definitely do play a bunch of games still. I do feel guilty sometimes because people will send me games and I won't have time because I have so many indie friends and like release games, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I've got this backlog. Like I'm sure everybody does on Steam.
Yeah.
But yeah, we still get to play a lot of games. It's just certainly not as many as
No, we've also
before.
been playing a lot more board games lately. So that's cut into our video game playing time a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. We've had
Indie board games?
what?
Indie board games?
We just started.
Well, like, yeah.
We did play Resistance, which is an
Yeah.
indie board game. But we just actually started playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time, which I had never played, and I got shown at PAX how incredibly open-ended that could be, and that it's basically like interactive fiction. And so we Skype with my brother and a couple friends, and we've just been creating this world and playing the story, and it's been like a ton of fun. And it's just like, because I had never played Dungeons and Dragons before, because I had like bought the starter kit and it was like super complicated with saving throws and all this crap, and I'm just like, but then when I saw that it could just be so open and you don't have to worry so much about the nuances of combat if you don't want, you can just kind of help tell that story. That's been really fun.
It's really more collaborative storytelling for us right now. Like we
Right.
haven't done any combat or anything yet, so we're
Yeah.
keeping it pretty light. It's just an excuse for us to get together with our friends.
However, there are some kind of indie variations, like I think it's Dungeon World and
Yeah.
Torchbearer, and like a couple things like that where they've kickstarted variations of D&D that people have like been telling me about, so I'm kind of looking into. So there's my indie slant.
Well, I gotta thank both of you for your time and for doing this interview. And where can we find you guys online?
I'm most of our PR arm.
Yeah.
we have everything is Misfits Attic, if you can pronounce that correctly, because it kind of slurs together when you say it. But we have a Twitter account, we have a Facebook account, and we have a website. So if you go to @Misfits Attic, or you go to Facebook.com/Misfits Attic, or you go to I think I just said all that.
Yeah, .com.
Oh, and a YouTube channel, because I do weekly videos, and that's also Misfits Attic.
But you have to scroll past the band, because there's a band that's a Misfits Attic.
Oh, right.
So,
Yeah.
Scroll past the band and you'll see us.
Misfits in the Attic or something like that.
Right, yeah, from like the early 2000s or
Yeah.
something.
And thanks for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, don't forget to check out A Virus Named Tom, available on Steam and a whole other other platforms, and avirusnamedtom.com. And also, Tim and Holly, thank you once again. And I gotta say, I am very disappointed by your hair colors.
Yeah. It takes a little while. It takes a little while for us to do that. So like Holly's like dialed back and back on the number of times she'll allow me to do checkers in my hair.
It's like a convention only thing now.
Yeah.
It used to be like we would do it once a quarter, and now
it's just like she's just like, it's gonna take a few hours. Like,
we just don't have those anymore.
Yes, it's all Haley's fault. We
Yeah.
just blame Haley for everything.
Thank you very much, and good luck in the
All
future.
right, thank you.
Bye.
Happy gaming.
And drawing. So when I got all grown up, I knew I wanted to do something with art and design. So I pursued a career in graphic design, and my focus has really been on interactive design. So I've spent the past 10 plus years working in different interactive media. And when I got together with Tim, that expanded out into creating video games. So I actually have a full-time job where I work on software for different devices. And in my spare time, I help Tim with his video games.
Forced labor, slave labor. And then I went into making video games at Rainbow Studios back in like 2001. Worked on some console titles like ATV Off-Road Fury and Splashdown. And then I jumped ship over into CG animation. I went to DreamWorks Animation. I worked on Shrek 2 all the way through How to Train Your Dragon and Megamind. Madagascar, Over the Hedge, all the DreamWorks films. Working as an effects artist, so doing like simulating natural phenomena like fire and water and stuff like that. And then working on systems in the background like foliage and stuff. And then at a certain point, I wanted to go back to video games, but I didn't want to. If I was going to work those hours, I kind of wanted to do it for myself. And I always wanted more creative input on the films we were making and stuff like that. And it's just really hard to do when you've got 400 people making a film. So I jumped ship, started my own little indie studio. We put out our first game, and now we're trying to keep the lights on, just so that I'm basically, the goal is to try to maintain a living doing what I love, which is making games.
And I gotta commend you on what you actually have produced because that is a fun game. Can you tell us about A Virus Named Tom?
Yeah, it's an action puzzle game that started out basically because I was frustrated that I started working on all these games with all these different people, and the projects always just collapsed in on themselves for various reasons. So I decided I was just gonna make basically a pipe game, uh, like Pipe Mania or something like that, and just put it out and get it out on XBLA, and that way it would have a game out, and then I could make more. And then as I was making.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Indie 500 Project Vodcast. Today we have some very special guests. We have the Keenans. Please introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm Tim Keenan.
And I'm Holly Keenan.
And we're married.
That is so beautiful. And we noticed your little dog in the background there before. What's his name?
Tux.
Or her?
Hey, Tux.
We have Tux, who's head of security here at Misfits Attic. And we also have a daughter, Haley, who's in charge of screaming.
Is she old enough to play any of the games you do?
We did a video, fake video, when I first launched A Virus Named Tom of her playing. And it was basically her on the keyboard, and I had like a gamepad behind, and I was playing. And it was really funny because she was hitting the buttons, and it made it look like she was really actually playing, but she wasn't.
No, she's only 2.5, so
Yeah.
she's a little young. She tries.
Future game tester, though.
Yeah. She's a good game breaker.
Right.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little about what you're doing? What is Misfits Attic, and what are you guys doing?
Well, right now, I guess we're trying to stay afloat. So we're pushing A Virus Named Tom, which is our first title, as much as we can. So we ported that to Mac and Linux. We were recently in Humble Indie Bundle 9, and we're also going out on Vita, possibly PS4 and stuff like that. So we're always trying to keep that alive because that's the only way we can make income at the moment, because it's our only title. And in the meantime, we're also working on 3 different prototypes, which will hopefully be our next title. And in theory, and every time I say anything that predicts more than a month ahead, I'm wrong. But in theory, in a few months, we're going to try to kickstart whichever of our prototypes we decide we're going to make for our second title. We're going to try and put one at the forefront and try and kickstart it so we can fund it.
If you're launching a Kickstarter, people are going to want to know your background. So could you tell us something about it?
Yeah, sure. You want to go first?
Sure. My background is actually in design, graphic design. My parents were illustrators, so I grew up kind of playing under their drafting table.
The designer in me couldn't just let it go. I couldn't just be like, oh, I'm just making a game like that. So I started thinking, oh, well, what if in between levels like it was a circuit, and what if in between levels you had to get to the next circuit and there were enemies, and so you had to dodge. And then that was making kind of 2 games. And even though I loved ActRaiser and games that took 2 distinct elements and separated them like that, I kind of wanted to integrate them. So we were talking on a walk one time, I thought, and it was like, what if they were all the same thing? What if when you were trying to reconfigure the circuitry, you were on lines in between them and there were enemies on those, and so there was like a dexterity element and a puzzle element. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. And then and then I got frustrated with my team, so then I was like, I have a wife that's incredibly talented, and I could just exploit her to no end. So I did that. And then eventually, as time went on, I roped in some of my DreamWorks friends to do some of the artwork for the kind of world art and the animations. And and then it just kind of all fell together, just 4 years later.
So how has the title been